All right, so yesterday we talked about the quadratic formula, and I think most of you were okay with like the plugging in stuff. It was just like the simplification where we started having problems. But for the most part, it was okay. But remember, we saw some things like you would see problems where you had really nice numbers, like example 1A and 1B. You saw examples where you really couldn't simplify it at all, like 1C. Somewhere you could simplify, you could reduce, like 1D. And then we even saw some answers that had solutions with an I. So I just want to remind you all of some things. Let me pull up Desmos here. So if you consider, for example, that very first example that we did in our notes, the 1A, where the quadratic function was x squared plus 8x plus 15 equals 0. This, actually, let me say equals y. This whole section is all about finding where this parabola hits the x-axis. And you can see for 1A in our notes, we got that the solutions were -3 and -5. Those were nice solutions. If you get a square root, it is a decimal, right? But it's still two solutions. There's two spots that it hits the x-axis. I can't remember in our homework if we had any that had only one solution, but that would be where the parabola is sitting like right on top of this x-axis or right below it. So it's just the vertex is on the x-axis. And then if you consider an example like 2A, where we had a complex solution, this would look something like 5x squared minus 10x plus 24. Oh, hello. I had plus 24. Which I have to zoom out to find because I don't even know where it is. There it is. Look, it never even hits the x-axis. So that's why our solutions are complex. That's what it means to be complex, is that they're not actually going to hit the x-axis, but we still want to find their like value, and mathematicians have found a way to do that by giving us imaginary numbers. So you might have noticed the pattern already, but you can actually tell what kind of solution you're going to get based on when you plug into the quadratic formula what ends up in that square root part. And so that square root, the thing that goes in the square root, is actually called something. It's that b squared minus 4ac. It's called the discriminant. So the discriminant, my pen is dying, is the expression under the radical sign of our quadratic formula, which is this b squared minus 4ac. So it's another thing for you to memorize for your quiz, but really, if you memorize the quadratic formula, that's just part of it. And so what it gives us is the different solutions, or solution types rather. So if you plug in b squared minus 4ac and you get a positive answer, the book breaks it down into like, if you get a positive and it's a perfect square, then you have two real rational roots, which are like nice roots. Versus if you get on something that's not a perfect square, you'll get irrational roots, meaning something with a square root. But I don't actually care about that distinction. The point is that if you get a positive discriminant, you will have two real roots. And that means that your parabola hits the x-axis 2 times. We see that many times. Again, I don't remember if you had any on your homework, but if you plugged in the discriminant b squared minus 4ac and you got a 0, you got a value of 0, right? That would be plus or minus then the square root of 0, which is just 0. So you only ever had one solution. And so that's where you have, we call it one real root, or one real solution. And that's where it's just sitting on the x-axis 1 time. And then the last thing that can happen is that you got a negative under your square root. And when you get a negative under your square root, negative, this is where you have two, you can either say complex, that's probably more correct, but I always say two imaginary solutions. I think I put it in Go Formative as two imaginary. You'd have two imaginary solutions where this thing never hits the x-axis. It's either floating above it or it's floating below it. Okay. So today is pretty straightforward because what you're going to do is you're just going to plug in that b squared minus 4ac. You're going to have some number. You're going to say if it's positive, negative, or 0, And based on that, if it's 2 imaginary roots or complex roots, 1 real root or 2 real roots. So I should underline that too. So I'm going to do example 3A here, or all of 3. So just like yesterday, you should start by naming your A, B, and C. And just like yesterday, if you want, on every new page, you can write the discriminant up top. It's that b squared minus 4ac. It's the part of the quadratic formula that's under the square root. So we'll have a equals, b equals, and c equals. So my a here would be 2. My b is 8. And my c is actually 8 as well. So all you need to do is do the substitution. You can do your b squared, and if you want to put it in parentheses so you don't mess up a negative sign, not that this has a negative, it would be 8 squared minus 4 times my a, which in this case is 2, times my times my c, which is 8. You can either type this into your calculator and just get a number right off the bat, or if you want to do it slowly in pieces, this would be 64 minus, let's see, 4 times 2 times 8 would be another 64. Should have known that. So I get that my discriminant is 0. So you'll have 2 parts to each question today. The first part is the value of the discriminant, and in this case, that's this, 0. But then I make meaning out of that discriminant. What that means is if I plugged this whole thing into the quadratic formula, I would have had a plus or minus square root of 0, meaning that I only have 1 real solution. So on GoFormative, you'll just type 1 real, 2 real, or 2 imaginary. Pretty straightforward, right? Again, if we were to look at this in Desmos, just so that I can make this super clear, if we were to type this into Desmos, that function that we just looked at, it'd be y equals, we'd have 2x squared plus 8x plus 8. And you can see that, sure enough, it sits right on the x-axis. We don't actually know the root value from this discriminant, but that doesn't matter. We're just describing how many roots it has. All right, let's look at part B. So same process. You can run through and just name these solutions. So A equals 2, B equals -10, C equals 7. Careful now, your B here is negative, so when you square it, make sure you put it either in parentheses or just type in positive 10 squared so it doesn't tell you it's -100. But typing it into my, putting it into my discriminant, it'd be -10, close parentheses squared, minus 4 times my A, which is 2, times my C, which is 7. And I'll just do this in one step and show you how quick your homework can be today. Parenthesis, -10 squared, minus 4 times 2 times 7. If you just type that all in right there, pops out with a number, 44. That's the value of my discriminant. So can anyone tell me how many and what type of solutions do I have? 2 what? 2 real solutions, because you can also have 2 complex or 2 imaginary solutions. So if I type this into Desmos, or if I type this into my calculator, I guess, 2x squared minus 10x, plus 7. Look at my graph. Look at that. It hits the x-axis 2 times. And I'm going to keep reminding you of this because I know these are multiple choice questions on your quiz, where we'll just give you a graph and we'll ask you about the value of the discriminant. Last one. Let's look at part C here. So I will start by naming my A, which in this case is -5, my B, which is 10, and my C, which is -15. I can plug these into my discriminant. I will do parenthesis, this time it's positive 10 squared, minus 4 times my A, which is -5, times my C, which is -15, So you need to be careful with the negatives here, because if you do mess up the negatives when you type it in, it'll give you a wrong answer. So 10 squared minus 4 times negative 5 times negative 15. And I end up with negative 200. So on Go Formative, that'll be the first part of my question, just the value of the discriminant. There it is. And then what type of solution this would be to, I always say imaginary. Complex is more correct, but imaginary, you know, you have the I in there, you know. It would have an I solution. And again, you can type this right into your calculator and look at this graph and see what it would look like. Negative 5x plus 10x minus 15. If you look at the graph, you will see not even a parabola. Where is it? Let's change my window here so I can find my parabola. There it is, way down there, and it never actually hits the x-axis. Okay, that's it for the discriminant. Do you guys have any questions for me?